It is great to see that so many people are interested in Auburndale's history. I can tell you from personal experience that Auburndale was an absolutely fantastic place to grow up about 40 years ago. And I know that many of you here tonight have equally wonderful memories of other periods in the town's history. My contribution to the Auburndale Community Association's historic perspective is a nostalgic look at the amusement and recreational facilities which used to draw people to Auburndale from all over New England. In general, the facilities were located along the Charles River, and I think that some of you, even some of the old-timers here tonight, may be surprised to learn just how many different things there were and how many different activities there were to take part in. I'm going to show you approximately 100 views of Auburndale and the Charles River from the late 1800s to the mid-1960s. Afterwards, I'll be happy to answer any questions and talk to people one-on-one. I have called this presentation tonight Down by the Riverside, which was the name of a very popular song which came out in 1902. And the slides are arranged chronologically, which means that we may jump around a little bit from place to place, but we'll try and stay pretty much in date order. And with that warning, I want you to sit back and enjoy the presentation. I'm going to do the first slide with a little pointer and then do the rest from my seat here. Thanks, Bill. This is a canoeing map of the Charles River, which was published in the early 1900s. Shows the river coming down from the Needham Flats, down underneath Echo Bridge, Boylston Street, now Route 9, then down across through Newton Lower Falls, around through Weston, past the area which is now the Leo J. Martin Golf Course, down to a wonderful recreation area called Riverside, which existed diagonally across from where the Riverside MBTA stations are located today. The river then continued on down past this curve, under the bridge at Commonwealth Avenue, and this area in here, 25 acres of land, was Norumbega Park. The river then continues on down past Wares Cove, Purgatory Cove in Waltham, down past the Waltham Watch Factory, Nutting's Boathouse and Ballroom, continues on down to Moody Street, and then the dam just beyond the Moody Street Bridge. The 6-mile stretch of the river between Newton Lower Falls and the dam at Moody Street was called the Lakes District of the Charles River for a period of about 30 years, from the turn of the century until the beginning of the Depression. It was the most canoed body of water on Earth, and I have some wonderful shots showing some views of canoes on the river. So with that introduction, I'll do the rest of the slides from my seat. This is a boat called the White Swan, a side-wheel steamboat which plied the Charles River between the bridge at Commonwealth Avenue and the bridge at Moody Street. The boat started on the river in 1872, and in 1893 they replaced the drawbridge which used to exist at Prospect Street with a regular bridge, and from that point on the White Swan could only go between Prospect Street and Commonwealth Avenue. British English novelist Charles Dickens, when he visited this country in the middle of the last century, recalled that his trip up the Charles River on the White Swan was one of his favorite memories of the United States. This is Pardelow's Boathouse in Auburndale. At the upper far left, you can see the railroad tracks and signal tower. The stone bridge is in the foreground. And Pardelow's Boathouse, later Robertson's Boathouse, is where the very first swan boats were built for the Boston Public Garden, and they were built in Auburndale in 1877. And of course, that's Central Street Hill in the background. One of the few things that was in Auburndale, or was in this area a century ago, which is still here today, Norumbega Tower. This is a postcard view, and the postcard claims that it's in Waltham, which is an error. The actual tower is in Weston, about 100 yards from the Waltham line. And Norumbega Park in Auburndale was named after Norumbega Tower. Norumbega Tower was named to commemorate the idea that one very wealthy gentleman believed that Vikings had sailed up the Charles River and built settlements in Waltham, Watertown, and Weston. This is the poster that Bill was talking about that are being hoarded in an attic or a basement somewhere in Maine. This shows Norumbega Park in 1905. At the bottom you can see the divided highway, Commonwealth Avenue, which is certainly not that different from what it is today. The large building fronting on the street was the restaurant building called the Pavilion. The restaurant was the second floor, and the ground floor was the car barns for the Commonwealth Avenue Street Railway, which built Norumbega Park. Moving back from the restaurant building along the double walkway there, past an area called the Flag Court and then the Music Court, the very large roofed structure at the rear is what eventually was to become the Totem Pole Ballroom. In 1905, it was called the Open Air Theater. And at that time it was the largest theater in New England. Behind it are some cages for the Norumbega Zoo. It had a very complete zoo, over 150 different species of animals. And you can see the river moving on downriver off in the distance towards Waltham. Moving back to the center right of the photograph, there's a small roofed structure there which was the merry-go-round at Norumbega, which existed for many years until the park closed. No, that was actually an artist's depiction, bird's eye view. We're moving down upriver about a mile here to the Riverside Recreation Grounds. This picture is taken from a perspective that today would put the photographer right about in the middle of Route 128. Excuse me. Riverside opened in 1897, the same year as Norumbega Park. It was a large recreational facility, the largest freshwater pool in New England. They rented canoes, they had tennis courts, baseball diamond, football field, track, gymnasium, restaurant, rented rooms, and it was quite an amazing facility, and many parallels with Norumbega Park. They both opened in 1897 and both lasted until the late 50s, early 60s. This is a postcard view of Riverside Recreation Grounds. This would be taken from up behind the area where I used to live off of Williston Road and down behind Central Street, looking from the Newton side of the river across to the main building at Riverside, which was kind of a U-shaped building around 3/4 of the swimming pool. And then the building at the right was the boathouse. And we're talking about the top view here. You can just see the small bridge, the footbridge, which still exists to allow people from Newton to cross over. The views at the bottom are two interior and one exterior view of the recreation grounds building. And I have to apologize for the quality of some of these photographs. This is the swimming pool at Riverside. If you can't read the fine print, swimming exhibition, June 1899. And the pool had a slide even at that early time, and a couple of diving boards and a diving tower. And you can see the building alongside the pool was in a great deal of use at that time, far more than in later years. Different canoe clubs used it for parties and dances and functions and meetings, etc., and was one of the more popular places in the area to go. Another view of Riverside from the perspective of the little footbridge and looking upriver. The canoes on the river at night with the moon in the background. And again, this is a postcard view, and for people like myself that would try to have an idea of what things looked like in color 100 years ago, thank God for postcards, because at least we can get the lithographic colors and make our own judgments. This is Robertson's Riverside Boathouse. Basically, the structure at the far left is the same structure I showed you shortly earlier as the Parlow's Boathouse. The building was just enlarged to hold a capacity of 400 canoes around 1905. And again, at the very far left, you can just see the stone railroad bridge, which is still there today. That we're looking from the western side of the river back over to the Auburndale side. This would be taken from the foot of Charles Street, looking upriver underneath the railroad bridge, which until 1914 was that steel truss bridge. 1914 it was replaced with the bridge that is there today. On the left side of the river underneath the bridge is the Robertson's boathouse, which we just saw, and on the right-hand side, the western side of the river, is the Riverside facilities. On this side of the bridge, what you're seeing at the far left is a building that was at one time called the Auburndale Boathouse. This shows it here at the right in this photograph. It was later known as Gray's Boathouse and later Frost's Boathouse. And again, you can see just at the far right the railroad signal tower and then Central Hill up in the distance. This is the Newton Boat Club, right on that same stretch of the water between the railroad bridge and the bridge, the Riverside Street Bridge at the foot of Charles Street. The Newton Boat Club opened in 1877, at which time they rented space from Robertson's Boat Club, boathouse. This facility was built in 1886 and was a very popular canoe club. There were 10 or 12 different clubs had their meeting rooms in this facility and held different functions and parties all summer long. People came out from Boston via the train to the Riverside station or via the trolley to Norumbega to spend a day on the Charles River in Auburndale. Moving a little further along, this is the Boston Athletic Association boathouse, which in the 1930s and 1940s was known as the Boston University Boathouse. Boston University bought the land from the BAA and had their Nickerson Field football facility, a baseball diamond, etc. there for approximately 20 years. And this shows on a warm summer, Saturday or Sunday, the river was crowded with canoes. People over the dock mobbed with people that were there for canoe races and tug of war and different kinds of activities of an athletic nature. The Boston Athletic Association, of course, held the first Boston Marathon in 1897 as just one more athletic event that they could hold to interest people in sports in the Boston area. We're moving a little further downriver now to the bridge across the river at Commonwealth Avenue. This was originally known as the Star Bridge, later just called the Charles River Bridge, and affectionately known as Rubberneck Bridge, because on Saturdays and Sundays there were so many people standing on the bridge and watching the canoeists in the water and what was going on, and the swimmers. Of course, at that time they were swimming in the Charles. If you can look closely at this photograph, you may be able to see that the city of Newton built half of this bridge and the town of Weston built the other half. Further downriver again, the buildings at the far left are the Norumbega Boathouse and the restaurant building in the background, but the small boathouse at the far right was at the site now occupied by the Metropolitan Police Boathouse, or the Charles River Canoe Association, whichever you want to call it. And in 1900, this was called McVicker's Boathouse. It was taken over by the Metropolitan Park Commission to have a place to operate out of, a headquarters for the police force that was on the river at that time. And then several years later, they built their own police station, which is this building here, the Metropolitan Police Station. The pink roofed building in the background, again for the perspective, is the Norumbega Boathouse. And of course, the MDC Boathouse is still in existence today. It's the first thing you'll see if you come off of 128 or across the river from the western side. This boathouse was built with several unique features. There was a clothes wringer room and a drying room for people who capsized in the water and wanted to come into the police station, take their clothes off and huddle under blankets while their clothes dried. There was also a complete photographic darkroom to develop pictures that the police took on the river. And at that time, the police took pictures of couples kissing in canoes, and the pictures were used as evidence in the court. There was also a spyglass mounted up on that second level so they could look up and down the river and find out what was going on. And the other interesting feature of this boathouse was a sliding pole, similar to what you would associate with a fire station today. It was basically a pole through a hole in the floor to enable the policemen to get from the barracks and office upstairs down to the water level and the emergency launch in case of an accident on the river. This boathouse was first called the Metropolitan Boathouse and later Emerson's Boathouse. It existed for a relatively short period of time between 1900 and 1910 or 11, and it is located at what is now the site of the Charles River Watershed Association, just a few yards east of the MDC Boathouse. The second level of the restaurant was a restaurant. The manager, the proprietor, was a man named Gus Neufeld, and it was a very popular restaurant. People came from all over Boston to eat there and look out over the water. This is an artist's conception of the Norumbega boathouses. The main boathouse is the one at the right. It was in place when the park opened in 1897. The boathouse just to the left of that was built 6 years later and opened in 1903. And the small structure to the far left was a tiny restaurant out on an island, accessible by a little bridge from the mainland, which was sold and served refreshments to patrons of Norumbega. I mentioned that Lakes District of the Charles as being the most canoed body of water on Earth. For a period of 30 years, there were approximately 5,000 canoes berthed on that stretch of the river, which is just a shade under 6 miles long. On warm summer Saturday and Sunday afternoons, it was considered to be a rite of passage for young men to claim that they could walk from the Newton side of the river to the western side of the river just by stepping from canoe to canoe. And obviously a lot of them got wet attempting to do so. But literally 1,000 or more canoes would be tied up to listen to the band concerts. There were bandstands at Riverside, at Norumbega, and at Fox Island a little further downriver, which I'll show you as we go along. And it was a very popular pastime in those days. Similar to today, to a young man's first purchase being an automobile, around 1900 or 1910, if you lived in Auburndale, chances are your first major purchase was a canoe. Canoe combined recreation and sports and transportation, and perhaps most important to single young people, it was one of the few places you could go and get some privacy, a young man and a young woman. It doesn't look too private in this photograph, obviously. Privacy in those days could be construed as the young lady's mother and father were not around. This is a postcard view of Fox Island, and Fox Island is just on the Newton-Waltham border of the Charles River, just beyond Auburndale, Wares Cove. There was a small amusement area there at the turn of the century, and it didn't last very long once Norumbega Park opened. We're moving further downriver yet, and this is Nuddings in Waltham. Nuddings Boathouse was in existence from the late 1800s. In 1914, Charles Nutting put a ballroom on the second level, and again, a very popular ballroom in the teens and 20s and into the 30s. This is the interior of the ballroom. And the success of Nuddings and places similar to Nuddings was in part responsible for the street railway directors, the directors of Norumbega Park, deciding to build a ballroom on their land. This is the Stanley Steamer Flying Tea Kettle, built in Auburndale in 1905. It was built at Robertson's Boathouse at the top of Charles Street, the building which is now the Neutron Building. And in January of 1906, the Stanley brothers took this car down to Ormond Beach, Florida, in an attempt to set speed records. If you look closely, you may be able to understand why car was built at Robertson's Canoe Factory. It was basically a canoe turned upside down with some 34-inch tires on it and a cockpit and some very rudimentary brakes. I mentioned the Stanley brothers took this down to Florida near Daytona Beach in January 1906 with a young man named Fred Marriott from Needham behind the wheel. This car got up to a speed of 127.66 miles an hour, better than 2 miles a minute. Absolutely incredible for the day. To show you how truly incredible it was, we're now 86 years later, and it is still the world's record for a steam vehicle of that size and weight. It's never been bettered. One of the open trolleys of the Commonwealth Avenue Street Railway. The Commonwealth Avenue Street Railway built Norumbega Park in an attempt to lure passengers onto their trains. It succeeded beyond their wild expectations. This is one of the cars that would have been on the line around 1900, 1902. And during the summer, these open cars ran out from Lake Street, and many people considered the ride down Commonwealth Avenue from Lake Street to be as much fun as visiting Norumbega Park. At the time the park opened in 1897, there were only 24 houses on Commonwealth Avenue between Boston and Weston. It was considered undesirable real estate until they built the street railway. Another view of the restaurant building at Norumbega and the meticulously sculpted landscape, Norumbega spelled out there. This is the interior of the restaurant. When it opened in 1897, it had a capacity of 250 diners. It proved to be so popular that within 2 or 3 years, they had doubled the capacity to where it would seat 500 diners at a time. And this is an artist's depiction of the restaurant with one of the trolleys in front on Commonwealth Avenue and a beautiful summer day at Norumbega. If you were entering the park, you came in up these steps from the lower right and along what was called the flag court. The walkway off to the sharp right would have been the rear entrance to the restaurant building. And when Norumbega opened in 1897, it was immediately proclaimed one of the most beautiful parks in America. The flowers and shrubs and trees were, as I say, meticulously groomed and cared for. New flowers were planted each year, and on Labor Day, when the park closed for the season, people were allowed to come in and remove plants and shrubs, bushes that were not going to survive through the winter. I talked to a gentleman from Newton who remembered his mother doing that in around 1915 and 1916, and he said that that was the only day of the year that she went to Norumbega Park, and she always carried away as much as she could carry in her arms. But he said she had a very low opinion of the women who came with wagons and baby carriages, because she felt whatever could be carried in your hands was fair, but if you had to bring a wagon, you were getting a little greedy. This is a photograph of some of the park security forces. Again, this was taken in 1899. They're posing on the steps of the bandstand at Norumbega, which was initially actually a bandstand where bands played live music 3 times a day. In later years, the bandstand at Norumbega became the refreshment stand. It was located at the same site. They just remodeled it. The gentleman at the far right in the white hat is Adams Davenport Claflin, who was the president of the Commonwealth Avenue Street Railway. His father was William Claflin, ex-governor of Massachusetts, and the Claflins lived here in Newton on an absolutely magnificent estate called the Old Elms, which is now the site of Newton North High School.
Who's that woman? Any idea?
The woman in the photograph was a matron, and this was her bailiwick. This was the woman's cottage at Norumbega. You can read the fine print, exclusively for women. At a time when other amusement parks, Paragon Park and Coney Island and Revere Beach, etc., had very poor reputations. Coney Island was actually known as Sodom by the Sea. Norumbega went to some lengths to have a very genteel and refined atmosphere, and they actually advertised in the newspapers facilities like this women's cottage, mentioning that no man would be allowed to enter under any pretext whatsoever. Inside the women's cottage, they had easy chairs and rocking chairs and cots if women wanted to lay down. They had little changing tables where you could bring in a baby and change the diapers, etc. And, as I say, a matron on duty at all times. And of course, who knew 100 years ago that women weren't the weaker sex? This is the Bear Den at Norumbega, built in 1899, and it lasted until the park closed in 1963. Bears frequently escaped from the Bear Den, and the park actually had a procedure in place to recover them. They were relatively tame. They certainly weren't that hungry, and they weren't going to attack people to eat them. What they used to do, and this story was told to me by Don Lunny from Auburndale, who owns the gas station down opposite where the park used to be located. He said that the procedure was that the first park employee that spotted a bear on the loose was to proceed on the run to the nearest refreshment stand, get one of those 5-gallon drums of ice cream, walk back to the bear, approach the bear and offer him the ice cream. As the bear started to lick at the ice cream, the park employee would walk backwards and walk the bear all the way back to the cage. And, this worked year in and year out, apparently. Those of you who remember the totem pole with love and nostalgia, as I do, this is what it first looked like in 1897. The rustic theater at Norumbega, the stage covered and all the seating, Lyceum-type seating in the open. And again, this is a side view showing you the seating at the theater.
What kind of production plays?
At the latter part of the last century and the early part of this century, they began with vaudeville, 6, 7, 8 acts of vaudeville, and the performances changed each week. As we got into 1905 and subsequent years, they also began to feature plays, musical comedies and melodramas. And frequently they would have a play one week and a vaudeville bill the following week, and then alternate through the summer. This photographic view taken in 1905, after they covered the theater over. You can see the huge steel truss roof and again the theater type seating, and we'll give you a side view of the same theater, not exactly the same time, but roughly the same period. This is a photograph taken at Norumbega Park in 1919. Second from the left, as we look at this picture, is Governor Calvin Coolidge of Massachusetts, old Silent Cal himself. And next to him in the white trench coat is a gentleman named Will Hayes, who was at that time the chairman of the Republican National Committee. Will Hayes later became Postmaster General of the United States, but is probably best known because he founded and operated for 30 years the Hayes office in Hollywood, California, which monitored the morals of Hollywood movies and actors and actresses. And this photograph was taken in August of 1919, just a few weeks before Calvin Coolidge became a national figure by breaking up the Boston police strike, a move which he credited with getting him on the vice presidential ticket and thence to the presidency. This is from a flyer for Norumbega circa 1920 or 21. Couple nattily attired in the outfits of the day. And at the bottom you can see some of the boats on the river, including one of Norumbega's 2 launches. And this will give you another view. They had 2 boats. They were called naphtha launches, the Josephine and the Velma. And they were not only used to take people from Norumbega Park out for spins up and down the river, but they actually had assigned stops at Moody Street and Waltham and Prospect Street, and a timetable where people could come to the park and then be taken home from the park by being picked up at, as I say, at one of the Waltham locations. Moving a little further down the river, we had to get something of Wares Cove in this Auburndale presentation, and this is one of the Lasell River Days, 1921, and of course they had the giant war canoe races out on the river. And you can just see in the background there in front of the building at the right is one of the Norumbega launches loaded to the water line with Lasell people in their gowns. This is John Benson, who was the zookeeper at Norumbega Park for many years. Behind him is what was called the Automobile Station and Carriage Park, which was across Commonwealth Avenue on the south side of the street. And shortly after the park opened, the street railway completely removed a hill which was on that site, leveled the ground, and ended up with 10 acres of parking, which stood them in very good stead in later years when people wanted to come to the park and the ballroom in their own vehicles as opposed to public transportation. Getting back to John Benson for a minute, in addition to being the zookeeper at Norumbega, he also managed the zoo at Lexington Park, Norumbega's sister park, owned by the same people. And when he left the parks, he founded the Franklin Park Zoo in Boston and Benson's Wild Animal Farm in Hudson, New Hampshire. This is a young woman named Maisie Lunette. Maisie was an acrobat, a vaudeville performer. Her act consisted of hanging by her teeth from a device attached to a wire set diagonally to the ground. She would climb an 80-foot tower, hook onto that device, and be propelled gently down the diagonal wire to the ground. In those days, vaudeville performers usually appeared for a week at any given venue and then moved on to another site. This photograph, I think it says 1924 on it, but I believe it was actually taken in 1922. Maisie Lunette was the first performer to spend a whole summer at Norumbega. We have another picture here. Yes, this is Maisie. And by the end of the summer, they had increased her act to the point where the tower was now well over 100 feet tall, and she took off on the Newton side of the river and was propelled down the wire and ended up in the short brush in Weston. And in trying to determine what made her act so popular, I spoke to a dozen or more men who worked or played at Norumbega Park in the early 1920s, and it was amazing how many of them had warm, personal, and I might say intimate memories of Maisie Lunette. Apparently, Maisie was a very friendly young lady. This is Norumbega's Ferris wheel. It lasted at the park only for 10 years. It was installed in 1928 and was an extremely popular ride until 1938, at which point it was badly damaged by the Great Hurricane of 1938. And the engineers of the city of Newton would, despite the fact that it was repaired, they would never give it a clean bill of health, and eventually the park sold it off, dismantled it, and shipped it to another amusement site in Ohio, I believe. This is an area called the Hollow. To orient you, the building just visible at the upper left is the structure which housed the merry-go-round at Norumbega. The building at the upper right is the theater, which was to become the Totem Pole Ballroom. And this area called the Hollow was used for free acts during the summer. For the most part, acts that were too large to fit on the stage of the theater. Dog and pony shows, diving horses, acrobats, elephants, trapeze artists, etc. And the performances were given twice a day in the Hollow, and they were free to anybody who had paid admission to the park. Well, here comes the smut, Martha. This is a group of acrobats called the Aeroplane Girls, who appeared at Norumbega several summers in succession in the late 1920s. And many of these photographs I'm indebted to a gentleman named William Hawes from Auburndale. His father was the photographer in residence at Norumbega Park, and in addition to taking photographs of people posing behind funny faces and funny bodies, he made a photographic record of many of the amusements and performers that drew people to the park in the teens and 20s and early 30s. This is the front cover to a brochure for Norumbega circa 1930 or 1931. A couple of new things have been added. For the first time, we see mention of the totem pole. Not only was it beautiful, but it was beautiful and gorgeous. I didn't want there to be any question on this. The other thing we notice in this is in the background a bus. The Totem Pole Ballroom opened in the spring of 1930, and the spring of 1930 was also when the last trolley came out Commonwealth Avenue from Lake Street. On April 1st, 1930, the trolleys were replaced by buses. And one thing of interest to me about this brochure is how much easier directions were in those days. I don't know if you can make it out, but at the very bottom, if you wanted to find New England's finest amusement park, out Commonwealth. That's all you needed to know. This is an artist's depiction of the ballroom. The dance floor at the Totem Pole was not that large in relation to the rest of the facility, but as I say, it is an artist's depiction. And this is a postcard view showing the sofas set in tiers down to the dance floor. In 1929 and early 1930, the owners of the park, the directors of Norumbega Park Company and the Street Railway, realized that they were not being successful in attracting people into the theater. Vaudeville was passé, people wanted to see movies, and Norumbega Park just could not get first-run movies. In those days, movies were distributed to theaters based on total attendance figures, and the theater at Norumbega was open only for 3 months of the year, and then only on good days. The park itself wasn't open if the weather was poor. So the directors decided to see what else they could do with this huge structure. They looked around, they saw that dance halls and dance pavilions were becoming tremendously popular, and they decided to turn the theater into the Totem Pole Ballroom. The ballroom opened in May of 1930 and was for many years one of the most popular facilities of this type anywhere. This is a band called Emery Doherty and his Tom Tom Boys. Photographs show the original totem poles, which were purchased from a place called Ye Olde Curiosity Shop in Seattle, Washington. The totems were actually made by the Quacketal tribe in northern Canada and the southern Alaska, and existed alongside the stage for many years. You can't make it out, but the microphone that Mr. Doherty is holding has the call letters WNAC on it, and at that time the music from the ballroom was broadcast throughout New England at night. This is one of the early rides. It was called the Seaplanes, installed in 1923, and after World War II it was replaced with another car called the Rocket Gondola. They never actually changed the name of the ride. They continued to call it the Seaplane, but I have, later on I have a photograph of the Rocket. The reason for the change was that the Rocket vehicle could hold more passengers and they could make more money. Despite the name on this building, there was never gambling allowed at Norumbega unless you count skee ball and pinball machines. This is a refreshment stand at the park. Those of you who went to Norumbega in the 40s and 50s and later and remember the free outdoor movies, the movie screen was located on the side of this building right where the casino sign is in this picture. So we can get that down a little. This is Roy Gill, who owned and operated the park for many years. Roy Gill managed the park from 1936 to 46. Then he bought it outright from the Street Railway and owned it until 1956 when he sold out. Roy Gill started in show business as a traveling bookkeeper with the Miller Brothers 101 Ranch Wild West show. In later years he had concessions and the nautical gardens at Revere Beach. He also owned a very popular restaurant in Boston called the Normandy Lounge on Washington Street. And I thought it was kind of apropos to tell this story. In the mid-1930s, a young band leader named Lawrence Welk was appearing at the Normandy Lounge in Boston. At that time, Mr. Welk was very embarrassed about his accent and never spoke. He had somebody else introduce the songs, and he just led the band. Well, at the end of the one-week engagement, the band that Roy Gill was due to have come in for the following week failed to show up, and the Welk band had a week at Liberty. Roy Gill offered to let Lawrence Welk's band stay over for the second week, but only on the condition that Lawrence Welk get up and introduce the music himself. And he did, and he never looked back. These are the pedal boats on the Charles River. I guess a lot of people called them paddle boats. The technical name was pedal catamarans, and they were purchased by Roy Gill from the New York World's Fair at Flushing Meadow, New York, when the World's Fair got over in 1939. Gill got them out on the river at the exact time when people were looking for amusement and recreation that didn't involve gasoline, because with the onset of the war, gasoline and rubber tires, etc., were all being rationed. Gill bought about 60 of these boats from the World's Fair, and they were so popular that he had approximately 100 more built by Norumbega Park people in one small boatyard up the river in Waltham. Those of you in back may have a little trouble reading the menu. This is from 1939, a period when my mother worked at the restaurant at Norumbega Park. And the Totem Pole dinner special for $1, you could get the fresh shrimp cocktail, roast ribs of prime beef with pan gravy, choice of potato and fresh vegetable in season, Normandy chef salad, and choice of desserts with coffee. If that wasn't a good enough deal for you, after dinner you took your dinner check over to the Totem Pole Ballroom and got free admission to the ballroom by showing your dinner check. The ballroom at Norumbega promoted itself in one way by means of these stickers, what we would think of as bumper stickers today. In the 30s and 40s, people were more likely to stick them on the rear window or the side window of the family coupe or sedan. This one pretty obviously from during wartime with the War Eagle and the military vehicles. This is another sticker. Dick Juergens was the house band leader at the Totem Pole for a period of several months in the summer and fall of 1942. Juergens was a West Coast band leader, probably better known as a songwriter. He wrote a very popular song called "One Dozen Roses," and co-wrote an even more popular song which has become a classic called Elmer's Tune. This view of the ballroom actually was taken around 1948, but could have been any time for a period of 15 or 20 years. The interior of the ballroom didn't really change all that much. As you look off to in the distance, you can see that next to each sofa is a small table lamp. The ballroom had a terrible time with those lamps. When the ballroom first opened in 1930, each of the lamps had its own on-off switch. Didn't take very long for people to realize that if they wanted a little privacy while they were sitting in those sofas, that they should shut off the lamp. Well, the following year, 1931, the ballroom personnel realized their mistake. They replaced all of those lamps with lamps which were on a single on-off switch. The problem with that was, Yankee ingenuity being what it is, it didn't take the kids too long to realize that they could unscrew the light bulbs and create the same effect. Oh, for more than 20 years, each summer, Norumbega Park hired a young boy, many times it was his first job, whose only responsibility all night long was to go up and down those aisles, screwing the light bulbs back in. This is a band leader named Baron Hugo. Hugo was the house band leader at Norumbega for almost 9 years, longer than any other single band leader. He actually came to the ballroom for a one-week trial engagement beginning on Christmas night, 1942. He finally left on Labor Day, 1951. Hugo is 87 years old now, and God love him, he's still leading a band.
Where does he live?
He lives in Milton, and actually performs all over. I know he's got some concerts scheduled for Waltham Common this summer, and he performs at class reunions and high school reunions, Harvard reunions, all kinds of events like that. Another one of the stickers, Tommy Dorsey's head atop the totem pole. A funny thing happened on the way to the display counter at Norumbega on this one. At the last minute, Tommy Dorsey had to beg off for contractual reasons and ask that they not sell a sticker with his face on it. So at the last minute, the ballroom substituted. Benny Goodman was coming in, so they put Benny Goodman's head atop the totem pole. In the rush to get it done, they neglected to change the musical instrument. So there's Benny Goodman clutching Tommy Dorsey's trombone. Another sticker, and this one came to pretty much be accepted as the Totem Pole logo, the musical note with the dancing couple beneath. The faces in the notes at the right is band leader Orrin Tucker, and the young woman at the left is the vocalist for that band, Wee Bonnie Baker, whose classic song was Oh Johnny, Oh. This area of the ballroom was the reserved section. For 50 cents for a two-person love seat or $1 for a four-person sofa, you could get up and dance and be assured that your seat would be there when you came back. And if you look to the lower right, you can get an idea of the beautiful carpeting that Roy Gill had installed in the ballroom. The totem pole dancing couple, musical notes, piano keys and musical instruments, and 5 colors. And in 1942, he reportedly paid $10,000 for that carpeting. This is the rocket gondola that I referred to. They actually never changed the name on the ride or the ticket. It was always called the Seaplane, but as I say, in later years, they decided that they could fit more people on it by changing the vehicle. Photograph of couples on the dance floor with the bandstand in the background and some of the beautiful chandeliers visible hanging from the ceiling. Those chandeliers were controlled from the lighting booth where the lights for the stage were controlled, and they could be made to appear in different colors, red, yellow, blue, green, etc. And whoever was operating in the spotlight booth could, for instance, when the band played Mood Indigo, could change the atmosphere and all the lighting would appear blue. Very beautiful and wonderful effect. This is a ticket to the ballroom. Beginning in 1940, Roy Gill made the totem pole couples only. This was in response to a problem, and the problem was simply that too many stags were attending, mostly stag gentlemen, and they weren't coming to dance, but because they wanted to see the bands, the Artie Shaws and Gene Krupas and the Dorseys and Millers and Harry James, etc. And the stag men would crowd the dance floor to get as close to the band as they could, and there wasn't room for the couples to dance. So Roy Gill changed the policy, made it couples only, and it remained that until the ballroom closed. I understand from one story I've heard that during the war, when men were in short supply, that 2 women came as a couple, one of them wearing a tuxedo and one of them in an evening gown, and they were refused admission. I also heard that in the early 1950s, several people from Harvard's Hasty Pudding Society came, men dressed in drag and escorted by other men, and were able to get by the guards and actually get into the totem pole. This area in the rear of the ballroom was called the teepee room. It was actually a separate building connected by a short walkway. And if you remember back to one of the early slides, the slide of the woman's cottage at Norumbega, this is the same building. Roy Gill in the early 1940s changed it, put in this kind of low-key atmosphere with the fireplace and the hassocks. There was a small refreshment stand, and it was a place where couples could come to get away from the noise of the ballroom. We're moving back upriver again to Riverside Recreation Grounds. This photograph was taken in the early 1950s and shows the pool. As I say, for many years, the largest freshwater pool in New England. And I say from personal experience that this was a wonderful place to go in the summer. 6 days a week you could swim at the pool, and on Mondays you could go down there and fish. The Newton YMCA Camp Chickamee had a summer camp there for many years, and the Alston Brighton YMCA Camp Albright was also located there. And some of you may be able to recognize yourself in this picture. Another photograph of Riverside. This is the Riverside Boathouse, and looking downriver. Again, the railroad bridge is still there today, and is just a beautiful scenic view of the boathouse. And this would have, again, been from the early 1950s. This aerial view shows Boston University's facility. I mentioned earlier that Boston University took over the Boston Athletic Association grounds in Weston. And of course, this area is now all the Turnpike interchange. At the very bottom of the photograph, you can just see the tracks of the Boston and Albany Railroad line. And then Boston University's Nickerson football field, the baseball diamond, tennis courts, dormitories, etc. And then looking off to the distance to the upper right is Pigeon Hill, Evergreen Avenue, Oakland Avenue, and then the Commonwealth Avenue Bridge, and then downriver. Boston University moved out of this facility in 1950. They bought Braves Field in Alston when the Braves moved on to Milwaukee, and moved their athletic facilities there. This is the Hultman Aqueduct, which brings water from Quabbin Reservoir in the central part of the state to Boston. The reservoir crosses underneath the Charles River, or this section of the reservoir called the aqueduct, the Hultman Aqueduct, crosses under the river right in Auburndale. Again, at the far right, you can see the railroad station building, and just to the left of the cranes is the Robertson Boathouse building, now the Neutron building. The Hultman Aqueduct is 300 feet down. The pipe is 14 feet in diameter. This was shaft 5, and shaft 6 is just a few hundred yards from City Hall. And then the aqueduct continues and the water enters out into the reservoir at Boston College. The work reached the Newton side of the river in 1940. The work was then stopped for the duration of World War II, and they started up again in 1948 and completed the aqueduct within a few years. Anybody remember Martha's Lunch? Little tiny restaurant was opposite where the MDC police station is today, and over the years it went through many different names. Despite its proximity to Norumbega, they just couldn't seem to make a buck there. It was Martha's Lunch, it was the Charles Confectionery, it was again Martha's Lunch, it was later Jane's Restaurant, the same Jane's that was located at Washington Street and Commonwealth Avenue, had a little summer stand down at this site. And in the period I can remember, in the very early 1950s, it was a Dairy Queen. This is a little further downriver. This is in Waltham, very close to the watch factory. And in the late 1940s, there was a drive-in movie for canoes on the Charles River. It lasted only for 1 year. One problem was that they didn't have individual speakers, such as at the drive-in movies for cars. They had one gigantic speaker which blared the sound across, and as we all know, sound carries very well across the water, and the neighbors were up in arms very quickly. Kind of a fun facility and unique as far as I know. There was never any other drive-in movie for canoes anywhere in the world. This is the entrance to the park coming in off Commonwealth Avenue, and the box office and ticket window is right behind those two small birch trees in the foreground. At the right is the restaurant building, which in later years was known as the Normandy Room. Roy Gill renamed it the Normandy Room. Some people said it was because he was superstitious and had had such success with the Normandy restaurant in Boston, the Normandy Lounge, excuse me. Other people who know Roy Gill said, yes, he was superstitious, but the real reason was when he came out to Norumbega, he had a whole warehouse full of Normandy plates, glasses, cutlery, napkins, tablecloths, and he decided it was cheaper to rename the restaurant. Some of the swings inside Norumbega Park, those wooden swings, were very popular, and you could sit there and watch the movie or watch the rest of the world go by. And, a lot of fun. And they were free. The carousel at Norumbega was built by the Denzel family, German immigrants who settled in Pennsylvania, and along with the Philadelphia Toboggan Company, built the two best carousels anywhere in the world. I've heard that if this tiger in this photograph were in that condition and still available today, it might be worth as much as $50,000. This is a horse actually taken from the Norumbega merry-go-round. A gentleman in Newtonville owns it, and he has it mounted on a pedestal in his living room, which is the right place for it. You can see these were all hand-carved by German craftsmen, and just beautiful workmanship. This is Cardinal Cushing, at that time Archbishop Cushing, atop the lead horse of the Norumbega merry-go-round, along with a troop of brownies. This photograph was taken in the early 1950s, and Cushing every summer brought a group of disadvantaged children from the Archdiocese out to Norumbega, and also treated all the nuns in the Archdiocese to a day at the park. And on at least one occasion, Cushing brought his very close friend Jimmy Durante out to Norumbega. Durante loved amusement parks, had started playing at Coney Island at the age of 17 in a third-rate nightclub and bordello. This is a painting showing the carousel structure in the early 1950s. The building at the left was a small refreshment stand that was not used very often, perhaps only on 4th of July and Labor Day when the crowds were extra large. Although the animals from the carousel were sold off when the park closed, the carousel structure itself was bulldozed flat and is today buried beneath the Marriott parking lot. This photograph was taken at the ballroom in 1951. At the right is Baron Hugo. In the middle is a gentleman named Bernard Schwartz from Brooklyn, who some of you may know better as Tony Curtis. And the young lady at the left was appearing in a movie with Tony Curtis at that time, and her name is Piper Laurie. They were touring the United States promoting their movie, and at that time, if you wanted to get your picture in the paper in Boston, you went to Norumbega Park. This shows the refreshment stand in the ballroom. In the background, the beautiful wall hangings, red and deep purple, so deep as to appear black in this shot. And the soda fountain, and of course they never served liquor in the ballroom. Ice cream sundaes and fraps and sodas and Coca-Cola and root beer, and I can remember a non-carbonated orange drink that guaranteed to kill you. Again, another one of the rides. This was at one time called the Tiny Town Express, a miniature railroad which ran from behind the boathouse at Norumbega along the river to the northernmost point of the park, made a circuit, and then returned along its original route. This is the Lindy Loop, another one of the rides. Very popular and very noisy. You could hear this late at night all over Auburndale. This was called the Swan Boat. Bears some resemblance to the swan boats on the lagoon at the Public Garden, although it's substantially larger and gasoline powered. The park had this boat out on the river in the late 40s and early 50s. Never was tremendously popular, and part of the reason may be that at that time the Charles River was probably the most polluted that it has been in its history. Since then we've learned a little and we're starting to clean up the river, but back in the late 40s and 50s, it was worth your life to go into the Charles River. Painting of some of the pedal boats at the float at Norumbega, and in the background, the culverts under what was then the brand new Route 128. The building at the far left is the rear of the MDC police station. And one interesting story about these pedal boats, in the early 60s, when Polaroid was attempting to develop instant color film, Scientists and chemists from the Polaroid Corporation came down to Norumbega on sunny summer mornings and shot several rolls of film of the pedal boats at the dock. What they were attempting to do each time was get within a single frame as many different colors of the rainbow as they could. In the afternoon, they would take the film back to Waltham or Cambridge or wherever they were working on it and try and figure out how to make the reds redder and the blues more true, and etc. And the next day, they'd be back with a new type of film and shoot some more and continue the process. Maybe the most popular ride at Norumbega was the Caterpillar. I can't tell you how many people have told me that they got their first kiss on the Caterpillar at Norumbega Park. Those of you who are not familiar with it, a canvas top came over while the ride was in motion. You can just see it stacked on the far side, and the ride's name came from the idea of a caterpillar shedding its skin as the top came over and retracted a couple of times during the course of the ride. But once that top came over, you did have a little bit of privacy, and presumably the girl that you took on the Caterpillar knew that was going to happen, so you felt maybe you had a green light. I speak not from personal experience. This again was the bandstand, originally an actual bandstand and later converted to the refreshment stand at Norumbega. Up on the second level and just to the left of the totem pole, you can see the orifices for the projectionist for the outdoor movies. Looking over to the right of the second level, you may be able to make out that neon sign that says James H. McManus Ice Cream. And of course, the McManus product, this is their logo. James H. McManus Ice Cream was very popular in this area for a lot of years. This is the refreshment stand at the front of the restaurant building on Commonwealth. For many years, it was called James H. McManus. In 1960, they changed the name to Totem Pole Ice Cream. There were no booths. This was only a takeout, and it was open year-round, and in the winter you could still get fried clams and hamburgers and hot dogs, etc. For many years, this restaurant provided the meals to the city of Newton for prisoners who were locked up in the West Newton jail overnight. The matron would call down in the morning and order a number of meals based on who was in the lockup, and then they'd dispatch a police car to pick up the food and bring it back to the station. In those days, the prisoner's meal consisted of a hamburger, a brownie, and a cup of coffee. And once a month, the restaurant people billed the city of Newton for X number of prisoner meals. Some of you may remember award-winning cartoonist Frank Dahl, who lived here in Newton and did cartoons for the Boston Herald for many years. This cartoon was actually based on an ad which appeared in the Herald in 1958. Bears wanted, please apply Norumbega Park and a phone number. And that appeared on the front page of the Herald. Frank Dahl took that idea and built this 6-panel strip around it of the bear waking up from hibernation, reading the want ads, seeing that there are jobs available, and heading for Norumbega Park. It appears, however, he's not going to be content to be in the zoo. It appears he wants to appear on the bandstand in the ballroom. This is a painting of the ballroom as it looked in the late 50s, early 60s. The painting was done by a gentleman named Charles Lidberg, now deceased. And Mr. Lidberg did a couple of other paintings of note. He did a portrait of Ted Williams and a portrait of local Boston University and Boston Red Sox star Harry Aganis, both of which now hang in the Baseball Hall of Fame in Cooperstown, New York. This view he entitled New Year's Eve at the Totem Pole, and reportedly actually went back into the ballroom after it closed in 1964 to finish up the painting. In the early 50s, 1954, there was a television show broadcast live from the Totem Pole Ballroom. It was sponsored by Howard Johnson's and by McDonald's Hamburgers. It was a precursor and very similar to American Bandstand, which came along a few years later and got all the publicity. But a lot of the big-name entertainers of the day appeared on this television show, which was shown on Saturday afternoons over Channel 4 in Boston. This is back to Riverside. This is the fire which destroyed the Riverside recreation grounds. May 10th, 1959. I was that day in Nantasket, as a matter of fact, and we could see the smoke in the sky from Nantasket and kind of said, gee, that looks like it's the direction of Newton, and headed back. And there was a tremendous traffic jam on Route 128, cars from north and south. Again, this shows the building in flames, and what we're looking at in the foreground there is the swimming pool. And very sad. And this is a view from Central Street Hill looking down at what was the Riverside Recreation Grounds. And again, the swimming pool appears completely undamaged in this photograph, but the U-shaped building that was around it is completely gone. And again, that happened in the spring of 1959. This photograph, taken just from behind the MDC police station, shows the boathouses at Norumbega in the early 1960s, and is one of the last photographs of the boathouse in existence, because sadly, same thing, all of the buildings built around the turn of the century were built of wood, and very little, nobody thought of sprinklers or that type of thing at that time. The Norumbega boathouse was destroyed by fire on June 1st, 1966. That was the third of a series of fires. The ballroom was destroyed by fire in November of 1965, and the restaurant building was set afire in early 1966, but that building was sprinklered, and the sprinklers put out the fire. At this time, all of the buildings at Norumbega were sitting vacant. The park closed on Labor Day 1963 and never reopened. The ballroom closed a few months later in February 1964. And of course, those of you who lived in Auburndale back in those days may remember that there was a tremendous legal battle to try and keep the park, or at least prevent the development of the land. And at one time they were considering 13 high-rise buildings on that Norumbega land. And many people, although many people are not happy with the Marriott Hotel, you can view it as kind of a compromise between what was there and 13 buildings and underground parking garage, which they wanted to put there. This is an auction held in the summer of 1966 at Norumbega, where they auctioned off everything that was left: rides, cash registers, pinball machines, etc., etc. And sad to say, that's about the last that we see in Norumbega Park. This is my last slide, and I don't want to end on a down note and have you thinking about fires and how sad that these places are gone. Again, another artist's view of what the ballroom looked like in the late 40s and 50s and on into the early 60s. America's most beautiful ballroom, the Totem Pole Ballroom. Thank you all for your attention. I'll be happy to answer any questions. Thank you. Thank you all for staying here on a kind of uncomfortable evening, too. I love to do this, but you may all have other places to be. Any questions? Yes, ma'am. It's being videotaped as we speak and will appear on Newton Cable.
Oh, really?
Yes. Yes. Yeah. Well, you can wait till it comes on and tape it off the cable, but... Yes, sir. Yes.
One thing I want to say that was a person thing, because, and we used to explore all around the area. So from a personal standpoint, I'm sure from everyone else, we appreciate the combination of the slides and the information, the little stories that you gave that brought it all together.
Well, thank you very much. There were a dozen or more boathouses on that short stretch of the river. The MDC boathouse is still there today. There was a boathouse called the Wabi Wawa Boathouse, which was up off of Islington Road, which is today a private residence and is still in existence. Other than that, just about everything is gone. Of course, as I say, the canoe factory at the top of Charles Street is now the Neutron building, and that is still there, but not much else is left. Yes, sir. Yeah.
What, besides fires, led to the decline of Norumbega?
Oh, where do you start? Private ownership of automobiles maybe would be the first place to start, and television would be where you would end up. People's idea of what constituted amusement and recreation just changed. The park was initially so successful because it was accessible by public transportation. In the 30s and 40s and 50s, as people bought their own cars, and in conjunction with the general ownership of cars, the roads in this country, in eastern Massachusetts, improved dramatically. When 128, what they called the new divided highway 128, opened in the early 50s, many people thought it was going to be a boon to the amusement park because people could come to Norumbega from all over eastern Massachusetts. Exactly the opposite occurred. What happened was that people from this area realized that with the new 128 they could get to the North Shore and the South Shore, and rather than having people come this way, it turned out to be kind of negative. People went in the opposite directions. Again, television had a tremendous impact on recreational facilities, and beginning in the early 50s, places like Disneyland, theme parks where people would go not for the day but for 4 days or a week or 2 weeks even. When Roy Gill sold Norumbega Park in 1956, he made a reference to the rodent problem. He wasn't talking about rats at Norumbega, he was talking about Mickey out in Anaheim. So there was no one single thing, but it just, interests change. Once, I speak growing up in the 50s, once a 16-year-old could have his own car and go to the drive-in movie, he didn't particularly care about having a canoe and going out on the Charles River. Other questions?
One more, just quick question. Was Norumbega appealing throughout its whole history to all classes? Was it a sort of single-class phenomena, or was it multi-class?
Initially, it was multi-class. It was felt, again, in the late 1800s when the park first opened, that for a park to be successful, it had to cross class lines and appeal to people lower, middle, and upper classes. In general, the lower classes came to amusement parks for the rides. And in general, the upper classes came to the amusement parks for the more natural attractions, the canoeing, the picnic groves, etc. And this lasted until the 20s, the beginning, say the early 30s, when the upper classes found that they didn't want to associate that much any longer with the lower classes, and the upper classes were boating and sailing and playing golf and tennis and finding new amusements. And in the 30s, Norumbega tried to counter that, as many amusement parks did, by bringing in a lot more mechanical rides, figuring if we're not going to be able to attract the upper classes, let's do as much as we can to attract the middle and lower classes.
Does that apply to Totem Pole Ballroom too?
I would say no. The totem pole kind of always cut across class lines. It was promoted as America's most beautiful ballroom. Harvard students, BU students, high school students, junior high school students, anybody in the area would go to the Totem Pole because that's where the big name entertainment was. You might be able to see Benny Goodman at Nutting's in Waltham or Mosley's in Dedham, but the Totem Pole was the place with the atmosphere. A very good friend of mine who grew up in Newton a few years ahead of me in the early 50s recalled that she actually went to Our Lady's High School, but she recalled that when she was in high school, that if your boyfriend did not take you to the Totem Pole on Saturday night, it was time to start looking around for a new boyfriend. Well, if there's nothing else, we do have refreshments in the back. Thank you all for coming, and I'll be happy to talk to anyone one-on-one.